Hello, watch enthusiasts. Now, over the Baselworld period and the Baselworld week, a great deal of chronographs have been released in various price segments and offering various different qualities and aspects. That said, though, I don't think any have caused quite as much of a stir as the new Black Bay Chronograph from Cuda. Now, this watch features an in-house, or so I'll talk about that in a minute, but an in-house movement, so a non-ETA movement, but also features a chronograph function on a Black Bay base, which is very confused, I think, for many watch lovers, and I will get into that in just a second. Now, as with every other Black Bay apart from the 36 and the bronze, this features a 41mm steel case with polished sides and a brushed top. And this also has those beautiful bevels that we've seen on recent Black Bays, which really do lend to a far more fluid case design. Now, this watch also features a riveted bracelet to give it a very old-fashioned aspect, which I do appreciate. Then, on top of the watch, we have a tachometric scale bezel in brushed steel to match the new steel Black Bay. But also we have a dial with a bicompax chronograph style, with a date placed at 6 o'clock. The hands on this watch are, strangely enough, snowflake hands, which are of course usually dive watch hands, and that has sparked quite a lot of controversy and discussion surrounding this timepiece. Of course, this watch is yet another spin-off of the Black Bay, and though I do like the Black Bay, in fact I considered purchasing one at one point, I do find that at the moment there are far too many models of this particular series and collection from Tudor. Now, the Black Bay is really intended to be an homage to the older Tudor subs, Tudor Submariner dive watches, which were superb in their era and really have secured a place in horological history. But I feel this watch is too far really from the dive watch aspects of things to really be a member of the Black Bay family. That said, I can most definitely understand why Tudor chose to release a chronograph this year. And the reason for that is they have the new MT5813 cost chronometer movement. And this was built in conjunction with Breitling, as Breitling used another one of Tudor's date movements in their new Super Ocean Heritage. And I think this joint venture will actually benefit both brands by providing movements which are both shared sort of in-house with a very high level of quality, and also will appeal to individual models and not simply have to be modified ETAs. Another benefit of this movement is a 70-hour power reserve, which is a real help to make this watch a far more practical choice for people who want a chronograph but don't want to spend as much as, say, a Rolex Daytona. Now, from the Rolex lineup, we see a new Daytona, or more of a facelift, I suppose, for the precious metal models. Now, though the rose gold version and the platinum version, along with the steel, have the new ceramic bezel, until now we hadn't seen the yellow gold or the white gold models with this ceramic bezel, which is now standard to these models. However, we've also seen the Oyster Flex bracelet replace the Oyster normal bracelet on these particular timepieces. Of course, the Oyster Flex bracelet has become quite a big name on its inclusion with the Yachtmaster, but I think this is a very interesting move for Rolex to stop using the Oyster bracelet on these models and in place replace it with that new rubber strap. Now, I personally rather like the rubber strap because I think it's more comfortable with regards to different shaped wrists, but also does still incorporate that very well engineered Rolex clasp to avoid one from dropping the watch while putting it on. Now, the next watch on this list is a creation by Heuer, or rather Tag Heuer, but of course this is branded to simply have Heuer on the dial to commemorate the days prior to Tag Heuer existing. And this is the Ortavia, which is probably the most iconic chronograph among watch lovers in the Heuer range. And this is a replica of the reference 2446 with the Mark III dial. And it was designed in 1966 and became a real icon, I think, and really has become one of the favourites of the Heuer lineup in the hearts and minds of watch lovers. Now, this new watch measures 42mm in diameter, which is substantially larger than the original in the 39mm realm, but I think is more of a commercially considered choice on the basis that this watch will appeal to a greater market. Additionally, the watch has that tricompax reverse panda layout on the dial, with those beautifully applied indices surrounding the dial, really framing the style of that dial very, very well. The hands are also thin and minimalistic, and very much a comment towards those older models with far more refined and simple dials. Now, underneath the caseback of this watch, we find the Heuer Caliber 02, and this is an automatic chronograph movement with 80 hours of power reserve made by Heuer. Now, this is rather a nice thing to see, an in-house movement at the price of this watch, which is very much competitive with those of Cuda, around the 4,500 euro mark, which again is an interesting price considering this watch is very much a flagship model of the Heuer lineup. But I certainly do like the fact they've made this rather beautiful vintage-style chronograph. Now, even with an in-house chronograph movement and a bidirectional GMT or a different time zone bezel, I can't help but like that wheel-shaped rotor on the back of the movement, which of course helps to wind the watch and contributes to those 80 hours of power reserve. So I must say, I think this watch is an all-round success from Heuer, or rather Tag Heuer, and I really am pleased to see it in the lineup. Now for Omega, Baselworld 2017 has seen a flurry of new Speedmasters hit the market. And though the Speedmaster Professional Racing dial has really played a quite major part in terms of sales and interest, I have spoken about this previously as it was announced at SIHH, or at least at the same time as SIHH this year. So I've already talked about this model, so I won't go over it again. But then there's also the Speedmaster 38mm, but I think the one which really deserves speaking about the most is the new 1957 version. And this is a re-edition of the first Speedmaster, the caliber, or rather the model, a 1915. And this was really a spectacularly successful watch, and hence the success later on of the Speedmaster and its enduring success and popularity within the Omega range. Now, on the face of things, this watch may seem very similar to the other two models released at Baselworld, the Seamaster and the Railmaster. Now, this watch is actually very, very different in that though it shares, or at least shares similar dimensions at 38.66mm in diameter, this watch actually has a movement which is very much akin to Speedmaster Professionals, rather than more modern coaxial movements as seen in the other two models released. So this watch features the Caliber 1861, which is a manually wound movement which is very similar to that used in the vast majority of Speedmaster Professionals, and has that tri-compax layout. And I must say that was a very nice choice from Omega not to go with a coaxial movement, but rather to go with something much more traditional, and something much more befitting a watch of this age. Now, in terms of finishing, this watch really is superb. The dial has been aged to a certain brownish tropical colour through the use of certain paints to mimic the changing colour that a normal black dial goes through over the years. Also, the lume is this yellow colour, which again looks discoloured by age, but of course is found in this fully modern watch. The case is a combination of brushed and polished finishes, and is extremely similar to the original in its form and finishing. And this also matches that very nicely finished bracelet with slightly shorter links than previously seen on Omega bracelets, to better mimic the original. The only real change here is the clasp, which is a more modern clasp for the sake of comfort and practicality, and also for the sake of build quality. Really, the accuracy of this remake should be applauded on the basis that the watch hasn't undergone any sort of aesthetic changes to the original, so notably the caseback is solid, and is a very, very simple screw-on caseback, unlike the more modern and more heavily decorated open casebacks seen on more modern Omegas. Finally, it's worth mentioning those broad arrow hands, which I think bring a very different look to this watch, and certainly bring it away from the more utilitarian professional towards a far more romantic aspect to a chronograph. Now, the next watch on this list is one which has passed mostly under the radar, and I think not rightly so in this case, because this is the Zenith Diffie 21 El Primero chronograph. And this is a very clever watch from Zenith, and a very interesting release too to see, because I must say I didn't hear very much about this watch prior to the show. And this has become a member of their lineup, or at least this particular series, has been a member of their lineup for many years now. But in this case, this is a 44mm chronograph with a squared-off, sort of softened hexagonal design. And this really is an interesting watch in terms of the technology going on inside it, because inside that titanium case, or if you choose the blackened version, aluminium, there is quite a remarkable movement. and this movement has two escapements. So it has one escapement running at the high beat rate of 36,000 vibrations per hour, so that's 5 Hz. And then it has another escapement running at 50 Hz, or 360,000 vibrations per hour, which operates that central second hand. So that second hand completes one rotation of the dial per second, to give you a much clearer reading of timings. Now, due to the fact that this watch will exhaust its due to the increased kinetic energy of having to turn that hand around, exhausts its power, its spring much more quickly, and in this case in 50 minutes. The watch has a power reserve specifically for the spring that runs the chronograph at 12 o'clock. Now this will run for 50 minutes on that spring, and of course one has to then wind the watch to continue using it. Of course, one doesn't have to stop the chronograph for this, so one could keep it running for longer. It's merely an inconvenience, I suppose. Though frankly, for that sort of precision and that sort of watchmaking, I think this is a remarkable watch. Interesting technology has also been used within the movement itself. In the case of the carbon matrix and carbon nanotube balanced springs, which are particularly designed and specifically designed for this watch to function better under the high stress they have to function with running at 50 Hz. Now, 3 versions of this watch are available, and they cost €9,600 for the titanium version with a closed silver dial. Then $10,500 for a clear skeletonized dial with that titanium case, and then again another €1,000 increase for the aluminium version, which is carbon coated to give it that black finish, and also has the skeletonized dial. I think what's most remarkable here is the fact that this watch has all these features, when in fact the only comparable watch with this sort of technology released recently was the Montblanc Time Walker 1000, and that is a €175,000 watch. So a 17 times increase over the price of this watch, which is just a ridiculous difference, and I must say I applaud Zenith for releasing this timepiece. Now the next interesting watch released is a Breitling Navi timer. Now the Navi timer is very much the flagship model in the Brightening lineup, and it's difficult not to like the Navi timer, as it really is a piece of aviation history, as a very complex watch with which one can make a number of calculations. But they've released a version which in its the standard 45mm case releases a movement which is very much new to Breitling, and this is a rattrapante style of chronograph, so a split-second chronograph in other words. So one actually can have two chronograph hands running independently of one another through the use of the pushers for the red hand, and then the crown as a mono pusher for the second. Now what's most notable about this Breitling is the very fact that this watch does in fact feature the first of these movements ever to be produced in-house by Breitling. Now previously, Breitling have used external rattrapante movements, notably in the 1940s, but these days they do, they haven't used them since then, and it's very nice to see this feature return to the Breitling lineup with this watch and as an in-house package. Now, other than this and that very nicely finished maroon dial and matching crocodile leather strap, this watch is very much similar in terms of dimensions and look to a standard Navi timer, with that slide rule bezel and double pushers on the side of the watch, though of course the crown now has that mono pusher on its centre. One rather elegant feature that I can see has been included on the dial of this watch is the fact that this watch does in fact feature the Brightening logo on the back of the second hands, but of course now it's been broken in half and is shared by those hands, so they only produce the full logo when they meet in the middle. Now the next model I'd like to talk about is from a company called Dodan, and this is a French manufacturer. It's a fifth generation company which used to produce models under the same specification as Breguet for the French military under the Type 20 and Type 21 types of watches. Now, though I would urge you to look at their website to see other models, notably GMTs, I find this watch the most true to the original with its polished case and very interesting movement from Dubois des Pras, and that movement is a 57 jewel flyback chronograph. Now, this model is one of the smaller models in the Dodan range, as they make much larger 42mm watches, but in this case this watch is a 37mm watch with a flyback bicompax or tricompax chronograph, depending on which model you choose. with a very attractive bidirectional, fully polished bezel, which acts as a different time zone to allow you to use this watch as a pilot's watch. It is also water resistant to 100 meters and is negative pressure resistant, as this is still designed to be a professional pilot's watch in spite of being very vintage inspired. Now, I think what I found most impressive about this watch is the fact that it costs €3,900, and that may seem like quite a lot, and I can understand, but for a flyback chronograph with these functions, frankly, this is quite remarkable when Breguet's flyback chronographs cost upwards of £10,000. So, really, I do find this watch quite impressive in terms of what it offers, and the build quality and finish which it offers, which is very much on par with Omega and even Rolex's. Now, these watches are still made in France, as they have been for the last 5 generations, which does add a certain history to the brand, and I think adds to the watch itself. Hamilton this year has also released a very interesting chronograph in the form of the Tramatic 68. And this is a 42mm chronograph with a reverse panda dial, which is a reference back to a chronograph from the brand in 1968, which also shared this design language. Now, the watch is slightly larger at 42mm, but I think still retains the look of those classic 60s chronographs. The case is fully polished stainless steel, which is in keeping with the original and has these protruding pushers and crown. It has a very heavily domed crystal and then a tachometer around the inside of the chapter ring of the dial, although technically speaking it's not a chapter ring, it's the dial itself. The dial layout is a bicompax reverse panda layout, with a totalizer for the minutes on the right-hand side, and then on the left-hand side we have the running seconds. The days is also placed at 6 o'clock, which is a nice touch. The movement inside this watch, behind a closed caseback to better fit with the original, so not having a sapphire window, is an ETA 7753, but it has been modified to give a 60-hour power reserve, and has been renamed the H31 by Hamilton. And I think this is rather a nice movement to have, because it means it's very serviceable, but also retains that longer power reserve, which I think is a practical feature for anyone owning this watch. Now, with pricing around the £2,000 mark, I think this is quite an expensive offering from Hamilton compared to watches from Longines with their mono pushers. But nonetheless, I think this is an interesting release and one which I think will be very successful in its limited numbers, as it's limited to 1968 pieces to honour the year of the release of the original. Anyway, I shall end here, but thank you very much for watching, and do please like, share and subscribe to help the channel and see more interesting content, especially about Baselworld, where I've released several other videos on other categories of watches released this year. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.